What's up, everybody? It is Moose here from OccupyFantasy.com, here to talk about Beyond the Model. We're going to do some NFL DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel. Talk about some bets, talk about anything you want for week two. I'm your host, Moose, at CFP_Moose on Twitter is where you can find me. Co-founder and data guru here at Occupy Fantasy, alongside Brian, CEO and co-founder of Occupy Fantasy. How's it going, man?
Moose, what's up, man? Week two, week one went about as expected, I would say, for you and I. But I know some of our members won some money, and a few won some money from ideas we spit on this show last Saturday. So excited to get back with it.
Exactly. Yeah, I can't wait to get to the part of the show. We have a bunch of viewers, and we say recommend the absolute worst possible stack, and then half our viewers go away. But that's what the
Yeah,
show's going to be. Beyond the model. Just for if you're first time here, you're watching the replay for the first time. Basically, what we do have our Occupy model. We have our daily plug. This is just taking it a little bit step further. We're bouncing ideas off each other, seeing what could work, what could possibly work, and mainly for the highest contests, the million makers, these huge contests. And then we also try and answer your questions, try and contextualize things for different styles of contests. So just instead of just looking at the model, we actually talk about it and bounce some ideas off each other.
yeah, exactly. And I know last week you and I traded stacks back and forth, and we both agreed last week, if I'm not mistaken, right, Moose, that Chargers and Miami were our top stack,
Yeah.
and they scored about 70 points, while every other game struggled to even score 40 combined. So not that it was under the radar or anything, but super obvious. We called it out. So let's see if we can nail another one this week, and maybe we can find a low-owned one that actually scores some points.
Exactly. Yes. And so I'll start it off. And in my rankings, actually I refreshed them up right before the show. They still are there, but the Baltimore and Cincinnati game, which if you're looking from last week, you see Cincinnati had absolutely nothing. Joe Burrow looked like a sack of potatoes. Baltimore said they're going to pass a lot, and then they just didn't. And
Yeah.
so you're like, why are they your number one? You know, Brian, it takes a little bit of time to get used to, especially for on the Cincinnati side. I know you've had injuries before. We both played sports. We both had injuries. When you don't practice and you literally go from injury, nothing, nothing, nothing to playing a game, it's very hard. You know, you get stiff. Even the pregame reports say Joe Burrow's having a tough time walking around, moving in the pocket, and that kind of shook me off a little bit. But now he's been on media reports saying he's absolutely good to go, no problems whatsoever. So I like that side as well. Baltimore is still just too cheap. I know Chris talked about Zay Flowers on his on the YouTube video for the channel here. Go watch that after this. Just too many cheap guys, and we still know the ceiling potential that they have. So I love both sides there. Now, actually, I'm curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one we want to target, bounce back spot. Plus Joey B's got the new haircut to debut on Sunday, so get the bad taste out of his mouth from last week. I think I prefer the Cincinnati side here. One, well, it's twofold, and it is injury based. So Baltimore is going to be missing free safety Marcus Williams. They're still missing cornerback Marlon Humphrey, great cornerback, and so that gives some more opportunity against backups for Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. T. Higgins somehow had 0 points on 1,000 air yards last week, so imagine we get a bounce back from him as well. Jamar Chase, number 2 overall pick in most fantasy leagues, so expect a bounce back from him too. But on the Baltimore side, they are missing their starting center, Linderbaum, left tackle Ronnie Stanley. Both these guys are high-level offensive linemen. So it's just tough moves because we want them to pass the ball more, and even last week, Todd Monken, their offense coordinator, admitted that they couldn't do as much as they wanted to with what Houston was doing and how the offensive line injuries shook out. So I'm not sure we get much more from them this week, but I think as a bring back or mini stack, Zay Flowers or Mark Andrews can still get you there. I just think if I'm fully stacking this or I'm playing two, if I had to pick one, I'm playing limited lineups. I think I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to stack the Cincinnati side.
I'd love to hear that. Yeah, and we talked about last show that at least for the first couple of weeks, you have to pick your spots on when you're actually doing the bring back, when you're doing the full game stacks. I think like, what I'm reading between the lines here for you, Brian, is that Flowers or Andrews or anything like that, that if it does fit and you know it comes up in your lineup, it's okay to do a bring back on Baltimore, but you don't have to force it.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Like you can just play Joe Burrow plus Jamar Chase and be fine on a 12-game slate.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Flowers likely will easily fit, especially if you're using our lineup builder. And Flowers ranks decently highly. So I wouldn't force it by any means, but I do think you'll end up with it just organically.
Makes sense to me. So curious to get one of your top stacks if I didn't steal it already.
No. So Baltimore Cincinnati isn't my top three. The top one for me is, it may seem crazy, at least on one side, but for me it's the number one by at least a tier. It's Tennessee and Los Angeles.
Mm.
So we get Austin Eckler out, doubtful. He's not traveling to Nashville. So this can mean a couple of things. So one, Josh Kelly is going to be extremely popular, ranks number one in our motto. We love him as a running back play. However, when we have a situation like that, Moose, I think one of the best strategies, if you want to fade that running back or you want to get leverage off that running back, is to play the passing game for that offense.
Mm-hmm.
So last week, basically, Miami just played too deep, didn't want Justin Herbert and the Chargers to beat them deep, and said just run as many times as you want. So Eckler, Joshua Kelly split reps, ran down their throats, but they weren't going to get beat deep. Tennessee is, for whatever reason, has kind of the opposite approach. They've typically been tough on running backs. So if that happens and LA and Kellen Moore, their new offensive coordinator, is smart, perhaps they throw 50 times, right? And if that's the case, we get crazy leverage off of Joshua Kelly, who I still like and still will play in a lot of lineups. But to play Herbert and Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, again, this is definitely a spot where you don't have to bring it back. Then I really like that, just an overall game theory play.
Yeah, again, if you know, especially in some of the smaller contests, you're going to see Kelly 50, 60, probably 80% in some contests.
Yep.
And if you're playing in these high stakes or these, you got to win it, these 100-player leagues, it could be a great differentiator by playing the game same stack. And Brian, it's not even like, if let's say you stack it with quarterback, wide receiver, even if Kelly gets a passing touchdown, you're still getting the points there, so it's not as bad. So there's still some outs that you can get there, and I think there's a bunch of other cheap players that you can fit in between there that can make it all worthwhile. So I like that. I am still leaning towards the other way though, and just playing Kelly in every single lineup. But I can see.
And, I mean, and to be fair, just look at his routes run last week. Ran a ton of routes. You can include him and just make a 3-1 or 3-0, and I think that's totally fine too.
I wonder how much of that would be for game theory. If you know the contest that you're playing and he's going to be 60-80%, do you just include him in the stack? It's kind of like a leverage, and you're just basically just throwing that one position spot as a wash, playing one less player against everyone else.
Just blocking that spot. That's definitely possible. The Tennessee side is somewhat interesting. DeAndre Hopkins, I think, muddies it up though, because didn't practice all week, but he is one of those rare players who they give him the benefit of the doubt that even if he doesn't practice all week, he can still play. Now, this is a new coaching staff for him coming to Tennessee for the first time. He even admitted. But the fact that they let him talk to the media on Friday, for those of you who aren't really aware, oftentimes after practice on Friday, media comes to the locker room, players are available, they talk. If a player's not going to play, they're too injured to play, generally the team will keep them away from the media and not let them speak to the media. Hopkins was present talking about his ankle, said he's going to be ready to go if the team lets him. So I think he's going to play. A lot of doctors believe it was a high ankle sprain, so even if he's out there, that takes away snaps from other guys.
Yeah.
I would have preferred him to just be out and we could play Treylon Burks and Chigakonkwo. In the end, I think everyone ends up being too expensive probably for a full stack. And a run back, I think Derrick Henry's probably the best option there.
Okay. Yeah. Seems like we're going heavy on running backs this week, and that's always a fun time.
Yeah.
Let's see. We got some questions here. First one from Hawk Dark says Pittman is going to be low owned. Will be a nice secondary stack with Collins. Yeah, I think we'll eventually get to that stack as well sometime during the show.
We actually will, and that's the point where the viewership peaks and then falls off the cliff.
And Jose Morales says, "Can you choose for me between Josh Kelly, Damian Pierce, and Rashawn White?" I think he's Cod White, but Brian, I don't know. We've talked about this. I don't know if it was last year, the year before. At some point in time, we talked about this where you take a look at some of the highest professionals, like the best professional DFS players. And when there's situations like this, starters out, and the backup's going to get a bulk of the snaps, they're not playing, 40, 50%, 60%. They're not getting 2x leverage. They're literally playing 0 or they're playing 100. And I'm leaning towards the 100 part, so I would say Josh Kelly for me.
Yeah, and again, I don't know if that's season long, if that's DFS, which site, which contest, I have no idea. If you want to provide some more context, sure. I think Kelly's just generally the overall best option of that group, but yeah, we need some more context for sure.
Yeah. Let's see here. All right, so for my next stack, let me go ahead and pull up my rankings here. This one seems kind of self-explanatory. Chiefs in Jacksonville. You have the high-powered offense. Mahomes, you already know what he can do. I like probably the Chiefs side more, and but there's a handful of players, especially cheap. I mean, you have Zay Jones as a bring back, only 4,700 on DraftKings. Uh, I think the theme of this week, Brian, is just there's a lot of cheap players. You can fool around and pretty much do whatever you want.
Yeah, there is. Pricing's, I wouldn't say it's stale like it was in week 1, but it's
Yeah,
still a little soft, especially at the receiver position.
yeah.
Kansas City's interesting. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, yeah. Wasn't there a report came out just before the show talking about Pacheco could get more runs?
Yeah. So CEH randomly popped up on the injury report. I want to say Thursday or Friday, maybe both days, with an illness, and then they called up LaMichael Pirine from the practice squad like literally an hour ago or 30 minutes ago, which generally signifies that one of the running backs isn't going to be available, likely CEH. Pacheco, I was pretty shocked at how highly he ranked in our model for this week already.
Mm-hmm.
And again, for those of you who don't know, our model's fully analytically based, looks at historical factors. We we don't touch it or adjust it. What it spits out is what it spits out. Pacheco ranks really highly. If CEH is down, who did take a handful of early down snaps in week 1, that boosts Pacheco's floor and ceiling. Last I checked, he was like 2% projected owned, 3% projected owned. When everyone is focusing on Kelly and other guys,
Mm-hmm.
I really like Pacheco a lot this week, and I think it makes a ton of sense if you play, let's say you play Trevor Lawrence, Zay Jones, Trevor Lawrence, Calvin Ridley, whichever Jacksonville 2 or 3 man stack, and then you run it back with Pacheco. No one's doing that at all.
Yeah. Yeah, you pretty much took the words out of my mouth there. Yeah, I like that. Very flexible stack with some high power players. I think that's a good way to go too.
And Kelsey's back.
Yeah.
Looks to be fully good to go. I guess the true question is, Moose, everyone saw, no one's going to want to play them. Everyone saw Sky Moore do nothing. Everyone saw all the drops Kadarius Toney had. I would be more inclined to play Kadarius Toney, but if you're playing large field, I think you have to mix those guys in based on, for Moore, how often he was on the field, and Toney, how often he was targeted when he was on the field, and the fact that absolutely no one in the world wants to play them.
Actually, gonna be hilarious when he gets a negative PFF grade again.
I mean, I said it in Discord last week, and maybe I'll be eating my words. I just don't think he can have that poorly of a game ever again in his career. Well, he'll say, watch this and see what happens this Sunday. But the fact that he had 5 targets on like 12 snaps or
Yeah.
whatever the hell it was is just super encouraging for Tony's usage, even if he doesn't play a full complement of plays.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my second stack. Let's see here. I see we got Ed in chat. It says, Moose, where have you been? I've been in Asia, but now I am fully back to the time change, ready to crush some NFL. And it says Tank Dell is going to outproduce Collins. Yeah, I know, guys. We'll be getting to the Houston stacks once we get enough viewers.
Maybe we won't lose that many viewers if we already got multiple comments about that game. So.
Yeah. Dot Bet says last week Jamal Williams went up against Tennessee and was a popular play who didn't necessarily get there. Is there any worry about that with Josh Kelly?
It is popular. It's definitely possible. Kelly is younger, better offensive line for the Chargers, better play caller, I would say, more involved in the passing game for sure based on his role last week. So I think there is a much higher floor. But yeah, I mean, there's a chance he scores, 6, 7 points, doesn't get in the end zone, and they pass a ton, like we mentioned at the top of the show. So there is some merit to fading. I was just so impressed last week, Moose, with how much work they gave him and how successful he was. He had 16 carries last week, Josh Kelly.
Yeah.
14 of those 16 were considered positive success. So his success rate was 14 out of 16, which is basically unheard of, right? Even if the other team is giving you runs, that's crazy to get to. Ran 20 routes in a game where Eckler was healthy for most of the game. And Eckler even said as much himself on that Yahoo podcast that he does. Like, I think he said before the season started, Kelly's the guy you want to pick up because he's been crushing it in camp and preseason. So I think Kelly, sometimes it takes the guys a couple years to flip a switch. I think Kelly has flipped that switch.
Mm-hmm.
This is a long way of saying I think he's talented in a good offense and can maybe overcome that matchup. But there is merit to what you're saying for sure.
Yep. Hawk Dark says, would you do a 3-2 Jacksonville Kansas City stack for a DraftKings 3-entry max contest?
I would only do that if the 3-entry max was small field, so 200 players or less. I know there are some like that on DraftKings. I don't even think I know this early in the season when we play large field contests. 5,000, 10,000 or more entrants, 100,000 entrants. 3-2 has not been a profitable move.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Cool beans. So I just talked about Kansas City and Jacksonville. I'll let you take the next stack, Brian.
Now it's just a bunch of stacks that are kind of grouped together for me. The one I like, I think one of the ones I think that not many people are going to be on are the Giants. And we talk about prime time and perception with Kadarius Toney just recently. I think we can also play that same game with Daniel Jones and the Giants, who got trucked by the Cowboys, just ran into a buzzsaw. That happens.
Yeah.
It's not something you ever want to see, especially if you drafted Daniel Jones in your season-long leagues. But now going up against Arizona, more importantly, Arizona's best player, defensive player, Budda Baker, randomly popped up on the injury report and is now questionable. If he's out, I really like this Giants staff. We probably won't know that until either later tonight or tomorrow morning.
Mm-hmm.
But even if not, bounce back spot against a terrible defense, easy stack with Waller. I think Daniel Jones, Darren Waller, 2-0 stack is a great play this week.
Yeah, I'm slowly starting to lean towards these 2-0 stacks, these minor 2-0 stacks. I don't know if that's just the first couple of weeks of the season. But yeah, that's one that wasn't really on my radar. But I'm curious to do a little bit more research and see how that turns up.
Especially as Ed says in the chat, Arizona D, for whatever reason, is chalk. I guess they scored a touchdown last week. Giants got blanked. And if you use recency bias math, that means they're the best play on the board this week. So even better leverage to play the stack against them.
Exactly. Yep. One stack, I don't even know it's a stack, but mainly just the one side for me is the Detroit and Seattle game. I love that Detroit side. And it's one of those things that I talked about last week. If you can just find players that gear towards top of the model in groups, it's great. So we have Jared Goff, who's third in our running and our quarterback model. You have Dave Montgomery, who's I think fourth or fifth. Amon-Ra St. Brown, third or fourth, something like that. They're all top five. Even on, if you wanted to bring it back, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, roughly around the same in our model, but they're in the high 20s or so. So you can have potentially bring back there. Sam Laporta is I think 10th or so, but 5 targets, had some good plays last week. A bunch of different options that can get you there. If you want to go 2-0, 3-0, 2-1, I think you can do there. There's just too many options that it's too hard for me to pass up.
I think that's fair, and I think a lot of people have memories of last year's game where they scored like 96 combined points or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So the only issue for this game that has me off of it that I would be playing a lot more are the offensive line injuries, right? So Seattle lost both their offensive linemen last week. Both their offensive tackles. Didn't score a point after that happened. 41-year-old Jason Peters, who's been with the team for 3 days, may start this week, which I don't care what his accolades are, that cannot be good. So the Seattle side is a bit scary. You got Aiden Hutchinson there. We saw him wreck the game against Kansas City on Thursday night. But if you play the Detroit side, who's also missing their left tackle, Taylor Decker, that's not great news either. But if you get Amon-Ra, Jared Goff, and we saw it like on Monday night, right? It was like Minnesota had offensive line injuries against a tough defensive front, and the receivers still put up points. Cousins put up points, so it is possible. It's doable. So it's not just something you automatically have to stray away from.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if it's just recency bias or whatnot, but I feel like every single team has offensive lineman issues this year in 1 week.
It's just tough, man. It's all the talent. A lot of people. I was talking with a friend recently about why the product has been as bad recently, and there's a lot of reasons for it. But I think the talent discrepancy between offensive and defensive lines has to play a part. You look now, it's much easier to play defensive line. All the athletes are playing D-line instead of offensive line. Right now, I mean, you can name, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 teams that just have a wealth of talent along the defensive line. And you could probably name that many teams that can't even field 5 offensive line starters that are competent, right? Like, it's a big difference, and it's tough.
Yeah. Makes sense to me. Yeah.
I mean, Nodem in the chat says, I think Carol said Peters is not playing. I may have missed that. The point, the overarching point is that the fact that they were even considering playing a 41-year-old off the street goes to show how dire that situation is for them.
Yeah, and Nodem also talks about how Arizona had a lot of sacks. Overall, played okay against a terrible quarterback of Sam Howell. So again, recency bias, which means they're definitely scoring 3 touchdowns this week.
Yeah, and let's not forget. Let us not forget. We talked about this last week, whether it holds true until week 4 that average draft position in season-long leagues or best ball leagues is more predictive than what happened last week
Hmm.
through the first 4 weeks of the season. So what we saw last week is not indicative of what's going to happen this week. If you had to choose between the two, I would choose a guy who had a higher ADP or a team that higher ADP than their performance last week.
Makes sense to me. That's a pretty good way to take a look at it. And I think now, Brian, is when we start to get to the point where we're probably going to lose some viewers if we have any like beyond the model stacks that we want to talk about and make the case for. Because as we talked about, in many shows we do, we always say if you can find a reason why you like someone, it's a reason to play them in high risk contests. And
Absolutely.
and I'm curious to see what kind of nuggets you can dig up.
I got one more. I actually have one that's legitimate, I think.
Okay.
At least I think it's legitimate. I know Chris talked about it, but Buffalo and Las Vegas. Josh
Mhm.
Allen not great against the Jets, but ADP versus recent performance, right? Allen, Steph Diggs, Gabe Davis, Dalton Kincaid, who the box score wasn't great, average depth of target wasn't great, but ran a ton of routes. So Josh Allen running back, and I think I don't know. Let me take this back. I know Devontae Adams is a great play this week. Jacoby Myers saw a lot of work last week.
Mhm.
He got a concussion. He's out. Devontae Adams got locked up a little bit with Patrick Surtain of the Broncos. I mean, they should. I would be shocked if he didn't get 15 plus targets this week against Buffalo. So Devontae Adams, or even if you play this as a mini stack, Diggs, Adams, Cook, Adams, whatever it is. But I think Adams is a fantastic play this week. Is a part in or out of this game stack.
Yeah, and as John puts out in the chat, he says seems Devontae Adams like very much projection wise on other sites, and ownership reflects that. It's about 20 to 30% depending on what site you look at. But he's not that highly ranked in the model. Curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So just another point to this is that our model, like like fantasy performance, we need 3 4 weeks of data to feel really comfortable with
Yeah.
it. I'm willing to overlook. I truly don't think the model is accurately. Either it's putting too much weight on what happened last week. I'd have to go in and look. But I think his target share for the year is obviously lower than what it was last year because of
Mhm.
last week's game. So I'm willing to overlook it. I mean, we look to play guys when their teammates are out of the lineup, and Adam fits the bill perfectly here as a stud first round wide receiver.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we know what he can do. So, as we say, yeah, just give it some caution, and if there's a reason you like him, then definitely do that. I think that low team total might have something to do with it as well. But
For us, yeah, definitely.
yeah, cool beans. So, Brian, this is where we get. A lot of people have been hinting at it in the chat. This is the part where we get to the really bad stacks, and I mean
Let's hear it, Moose.
this is
Let's
bad.
hear it.
I sent it to you actually before. They're actually my lowest ranked. Both teams are literally the lowest ranked teams in my rankings. But there's sometimes you got to just find ways to get there. And I'm talking about the Houston Indianapolis game.
You gotta find ways to get to the worst team on the slate. Talk to me about it, Moose.
This again, this is just for if you're playing like the absolute highest risk contest. You're talking about milli makers, these crazy like the play actions that are 100,000+ entrants. Again, C.J. Stroud questionable to play. If we get Davis Mills, I sent you what could happen. You have Josh Kelly 5K, Davis Mills 4,600. Chris loves the guy. Tank Dell, he's super cheap as well. There's a bunch of cheap guys. You can run it back with Pittman or someone else. You get a 2-1 stack. That opens it up with so much that you're able to play just any stud you want. McCaffrey, Diggs, Jamar Chase. You can just throw them in however you want, and basically any stud is fit, can fit there. Even if Stroud does play, there's a little bit that you can get there. You got to do some wiggle room, but you can pretty much play any absolute stud you want. So my thought process is they have to just put up any amount of points. There's no other game combo that if you stack is allowing you to fit this many studs in. So if the studs do well and this stack does even remotely close to okay, that shoots you up the leaderboards.
I mean, we've seen Millie winners. Baker Mayfield comes to mind, where he scored like 10 or 15 points at quarterback and still won $1 million in 100 200,000 person field. So it is certainly possible. Houston passed over expectation last week, which I don't think a lot of people thought would happen. And Houston dealing with some secondary injuries, so Indy should have no trouble keeping the pace. One guy I love this week that's sub 5% is Zach Moss.
Hmm.
I think 3% was our latest projection. When you have Kelly, you have AJ Dillon, some of these other guys that are super cheap. Moss is going to go overlooked, especially after not playing last week. He was slated to be the starter. They didn't really sign any vets. I think a lot of people thought they would sign Kareem Hunt or Leonard Fournette once JT went through his whole thing. Evan Hall, the rookie, I was high on. Injured last week. He's on IR. Deion Jackson was horrible last week. Played great last year, but yeah, I figured this is a new coaching staff. We actually talked about this last week. And he fumbled twice for this new coaching staff. His yards gained under expectation. His PFF grade, I believe, were pretty poor overall. Zach Moss has been ready to go, finally healthy. I think Moss can take control of this backfield, and if they lead against Houston, a bad team, we saw the Baltimore rush for 3 touchdowns last week. Moss could smash at I think 4,700 on DraftKings.
Yeah. All right. So we're playing $4,700 Zach Moss, $5,000 Josh Kelly, 4,600 Davis Mills. We're gonna just have every stud and then just leave $8,000 left over. I love it.
Chase Diggs, Adams, Kelsey, and then you're
Yeah.
good to go.
Yeah. Exactly. So I like that. I mean, even if you play the other side, I don't know. I mean, you have enough pieces that could get there, but the Houston side is probably what I would gear towards if you're playing super high risk contests.
I mean, Rich was in too. We saw it last week. Saw his rushing ability. Pittman 11 targets. Pittman's still under 5% owned. He was the cover boy of this stream, in fact, when I put it together. So I think it is surprisingly a game to target, despite I think the perception, the public perception of that game.
Yep. So I spoke pretty bad stack into existence. I'm curious to get some of your bad stacks.
I think I have one that we both agree on. I'll save it for you, and I'll give one that will actually dip the viewership now. Denver and Washington. It looks pretty gross. The model's surprisingly a fan. Sam Howell ranks pretty highly. What I'm not a fan of is Coach Ron Rivera saying that he doesn't believe in getting there early for altitude, and I think they're going to show up to today and just go for it. And I don't think that's the way to go when you're running a professional sports organization. But Jerry Jeudy back, Cortland Sutton. The run game is a bit of a mess. They want to get Jordan McLaughlin more touches in Denver. Like what? It's week 2. It's way too early for this type of talk. But condensed target tree on the Washington side should be condensed target tree. Adam Troutman's cheap on DK with Greg Dulcich out at tight end for Denver. So another cheap stack. This is like a Indy Houston, except one team is not prepared for the altitude.
Yeah, I mean, I literally was in Denver for a day, last month, and yeah, I tried to go for a walk and nearly died. That altitude is no joke, man. So
It is,
having to play an entire game without just like even remotely practicing in it seems bad. But yeah, that was one thing I pointed out in our staff group chat was, Sam Howell was ranked kind of high. He's dipped down since opening a couple of points, but yeah, I would like to know what the model says there. Anytime you can play a sub 5% stack, 1% quarterback, anytime, and they actually score, then you shoot up leaderboards pretty quick.
Yeah, exactly. That is exactly true. And this is just another cheaper one like Houston, like you said, that can help you fit into some of the studs on the slate.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool. So I'll leave this last stack here, and while we're waiting for that, if y'all have any questions, definitely go ahead and ask. Brian, this one stack I was fooling around with. I think this is the stack you were talking about. It's one of the weird no QB stacks. I think you don't have to particularly put the quarterback in, but that's San Francisco and Rams side. Brock Purdy is pretty low in our model, but he is 5,700. But everyone else on the team ranks pretty high. CMC second ranked running back. Deebo Samuel's pretty high. Ayuk, we saw him score a bunch of touchdowns last week. Even on the other side, Tutu Atwell, Puka, I know a lot of people love him. So a lot of kind of highly ranked people outside of the quarterback. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that side.
Great mini stacks, I think. And this is like Houston, like Denver, those games, cheaper ways to fit in studs. I think both Stafford and Purdy are sub 3%. I know Stafford's 1%. I think some people are scared of San Francisco's defense, rightfully so. I think for the most part, I think last week was more of a reflection of Pittsburgh's offense than it was San Francisco's defense. But these guys are so cheap, and in Atwell and Nakua's case, target hogs that no matter the defense, if they're getting 10 plus targets, like you're gonna pay for that at 4K or in the 4K range.
Yeah.
So I think they're going to be popular by themselves, especially in the Kua. The way to offset that ownership, if you do want to play them, is to mini stack or game stack. We've talked about that earlier in the show. So that is the way. If you feel like you have to play Nakua this week, you feel like you got to play Atwell. If you play a San Francisco guy or you play Stafford with them, that is one way to push down that ownership of that guy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we just talked about some of the worst teams. Our viewership did not drop. So thank you all for staying. I really appreciate that. And yes, if you guys have any questions, we're here for a couple more minutes. Normally the show's about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on what we have to talk about. Brian, do you have any other stacks or anything else that you want to talk about?
I'm just looking through my notes here to see if there's any other players that give bumps. Michael Gallup's 1% owned, and Brandon Cooks is likely out tomorrow. So wide receiver 2 on a big offense at 1% owned.
Yeah.
When his teammates out, I like Michael Gallup a lot. I'm just looking here for other guys. Oh yeah, I didn't even say this, by the way. When we talked about that Chargers stack, Tennessee's missing 2 secondary members. Starting cornerback Christian Fulton, starting safety Amani Hooker. Like everything is lining up for a Chargers passing offense to explode tomorrow. So I think you got to play that. And then let me see here.
There was actually one question I wanted to ask you. We didn't really have it last week because every good tight end was out. But we have Kelsey back now. Andrew's back. We actually have like elite tight ends. So it's always interesting to me. I always have that internal battle when building lineups. Do I pay $8,000 for a tight end, or do I go super cheap? And Kelsey's number 1 in the model here this week. But right next following him, you can save $4,300 with Kincaid. So curious to get your thoughts kind of around tight end this week if you're one-offing them. Do you normally go with the stud, or kind of really all depends on how your lineup's going?
Yeah, it definitely depends on the lineup and the rest of the slate, how cheap guys are. I think we mentioned a few times how cheap some of the players are here. And if you look at the state of the tight end position, look how few points were scored at tight end last week. If that happens again this week and Kelsey puts up 25 or 30, you're going to need him probably to win GPPs. So I think when in doubt, I would err on the side of caution and playing him if I had to choose. But he could be limited coming back. Could be, he's old now, right? Like there's a chance the production falls off some. Model's not buying that. So I think if I had to lean towards it, I would pay up for Kelsey.
Yeah. Last question here from Ed. He says the best worst and worst best.
All right, let's see. I'm gonna sort by ownership here. I think the worst best play is Josh Jacobs if this ownership holds, where he's still double-digit ownership. Let me check here on my end. Josh Jacobs, yeah, we have him as the second highest projected. I'm still not convinced that it ends up that way, but if Josh Jacobs is 15% plus, I think that's the worst play.
Yeah, hot take is I think the worst best play is Josh Kelly, right?
Ooh, okay.
Just because we talked about it for so many times. The whole offense pretty much has a guarantee, like it's set up to explode, and we've seen it before where sometimes these 5K people don't actually hit. If the Chargers pass for 2-3 touchdowns, Kelly he could get there, with his 10 points. I know you've had a big win over on FanDuel when I can't remember who it was. I think it was for Pittsburgh when he scored like 8 points. But
Jalen Samuels, yep.
Yeah, Jalen Samuels. So he can still get you there, but I don't see a path for him to really explode. I see a path, but I see the more likely path of everyone else around him exploding. That being said, I'm still playing him in all the lineups, but I think that's my worst best.
I think that's fair. That's totally fair. All right, that's a really good argument for it, Moose. So let's go best worst. So maybe let's go 3% or less. I already said Zach Moss as my best worst. I'll stick with him at 3%. Do you have a player that's sub 3% that you think's the best play? That you wouldn't necessarily recommend in the daily plug, but you're recommending here on stream?
I think I have a play. If it holds up, I think. Let's see, the best worst play. Man,
it could be Kadarius Toney too, by the way.
I was thinking that, but I'm not going to go there. I think I'm going to go. What's kind of crazy though? If you have ownership under 5%, you get a hell of a lot of good wide receivers.
Yeah.
None of them are particularly bad. I'm gonna say the best worst. I think I'm gonna stick with you. I'm gonna stick with what the model originally had. I'm gonna say Sam Howell at 1%. Washington quarterback
Wow.
is the best worst play.
All right. There we go. Let's see if viewership drops now.
And see, we got George here in the chat. It says pick three. George, you let us know what type of contest you're in, if this is season long or daily fantasy, or what type of contest you're playing. He says pick three: Jerry Judy, Elijah Moore, Rakai White, Josh Kelly.
Yeah, let us know what if that's season long, what the scoring is,
Yeah.
and we'll happily answer that.
Uh,
Nicholas says, is Tajay Spears' usage sustainable? He was lined up at wide receiver, in addition to his backfield work. Yeah, the only thing stopping him is long-term health. Like he literally has no knees, and people. I think I was surprised he got drafted. And when I heard that, I was like, wow, that's probably not the position to have zero knees. But outsnapped Derrick Henry in a competitive game last week, so I would say it is sustainable until his knees explode. So yes.
George says a season half PPR.
All right, Josh Kelly, Elijah Moore, Rashad White.
All right.
I'm not gonna trust Jerry Judy just yet, coming off the hamstring.
Yeah. It makes sense to me. Cool. So any last thoughts, Brian? Actually, you know what? We haven't done this. I guess this is kind of the best worst but thing, but we haven't done a cheap wide receiver. We didn't do it last week. The cheap wide receiver touchdown call.
Okay,
So
let's do that.
5% or less, and on DraftKings we'll say less than 6,000. That seems to.
I was gonna say let's say 5,000.
All
Let's
right.
make it hard.
It's usually a good
All right.
thing.
Less than 5%.
Uh, let's see.
You know what I'm gonna say? I already got mine. It's Odell Beckham, who I was not high
Oh.
on coming into the season,
Hmm.
but he played in 2 wide receiver sets over Rashad Bateman last week. Again, not saying that's going to be the case this week, but at 1%, maybe Baltimore can make good on their preseason promises and pass the ball more. I think Odell Beckham at 1% is my $4,700 cheap wide receiver, low owned touchdown call.
I dig it. And George, he must realize that his opponent was in the chat because he deleted his messages. So very sneaky of George. So I appreciate it.
I get that edge.
I know, right? And but no, for me, I gotta go full circle with it. I gotta go Tank Dell at
There you go.
0%, $3,200 on DraftKings. What is he? 4,800 on FanDuel. If I'm going all in on Houston stack and playing in my lineups, I gotta hope he gets a touchdown. So that's my call there.
Tank Dell. Chris will be proud. Chris has been all over him since May, I think, or March. So, and on that note, so the daily plug is out. OccupyFantasy.com. The link is in the description. All of Chris's top plays, lineup instruction tips, our Occupy model that Moose has referenced many times is up and running. Lineup builder, build up 300 lineups. In the video that Chris did last week, kind of a high-level overview of the slate, much more low risk than what we talk about in this video. Make sure you go check that out after you watch this.
Absolutely. And Brian, last thing before I take us out of here, how did all of your best ball teams do week one?
Pretty well. I had a lot of Roshan Johnson, so the garbage time certainly helped there.
Okay.
I'm trying not to check every week, but if I'm playing lower volume in DFS and or I'm losing, then I'm more inclined to check how my best ball teams are doing. So I was happy to see them. What about you?
Did okay. I was out for basically the last half of our drafting season. When that's kind of when I like to draft later towards the season than at the start of the season than before. So didn't get as many in as I wanted to. But I have a pretty couple good looks. I think I have a handful in the underdog one advancing. I think 2 or 3 in the DraftKings one advancing. So looking okay for me.
Nice. That's good. And again, it's too early to always check, but I'd rather be ahead than behind at this point. So so why not be okay with that?
Yeah.
Parker says, should I trade Brian Robinson for DeAndre Swift? Wait, let's say or 4.
I think it says or. I don't know.
You will get more for DeAndre Swift for sure. Yes, I would try to trade Swift after that huge game. See what you can get from him. If you try to trade Brian Robinson after what he did versus what DeAndre Swift did after what he did, you're gonna get a lot more for DeAndre Swift if you're choosing between the two.
Yep, absolutely. So if that's not the case, then just let us know, clarify, and we'll clarify our answer. But that'll pretty much do it for tonight's show. Brian, are you doing any UFC stuff with Jake or no?
No UFC because it's only 11 fights, but all the typical content is out there for you to consume.
Perfect. And yeah, don't forget Dot Bets. He was in the chat earlier. He's got his show tomorrow. Go check him out. Talk about betting. He's gonna be using some of our tools as well to help out to make more profitable bets. Chris will be in the Discord doing the live Q&A and tomorrow, and so go ahead and check that out as well. And then let's win some money. Let's have a good time, and hopefully we'll be back here next week to talk about how Houston won us $1 million.
Yes, exactly. Just really quickly, one final news note. Patrick Taylor, Green Bay running back, elevated from the practice squad. That was expected if Aaron Jones is going to be out. He didn't practice all week, so Aaron Jones almost assuredly out. So A.J. Dillon will start. Emmanuel Wilson is their number 2. So for your showdown players grinding the 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. showdown slates, Emmanuel Wilson's a cheap guy there.
Nice. And Parker did say, should he trade Brian Robinson for Swift? To clarify.
I mean, if you can do it, but the person who has Swift's gonna laugh in your face. Like there's no chance, dude. Like if you say I'll give you Brian Robinson for DeAndre Swift, and they say yes, then take it and run. But you're probably going to get yelled at if you even offer that.
That's when you see the trade and the commissioner says, "Oh, hold on, we got to put this trade up for a vote."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yep.
It's just not gonna happen.
Exactly. But yeah, that'll do it for tonight's show. Until next week, Moose and Brian here from Occupy Fantasy. Have a good night.
Peace.